A crimson sun dipped below the jagged skyline of Earth's last untamed wilderness, its dying light stretching long, claw-like shadows across the dense forest. The towering pines swayed as a cold wind whispered through the valley, rustling the undergrowth in murmurs of secrets long forgotten. A strange stillness hung in the air, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant rain, but the quiet was deceptive. From the heavens, a sleek obsidian vessel cut through the atmosphere without a sound. No thrusters, no sonic booms, only the eerie hum of gravitational displacement as it descended through the thick cloud cover. The ship was a thing of nightmares, a sculpted predator given form, its jagged design reminiscent of the talons of its creators. It hovered for mere moments before vanishing into the treetops, unseen, unheard. The hunt had begun. Virok stepped onto the foreign soil, his elongated pupils contracting as his visor adjusted to the dim light. His nostrils flared at the scent of unfamiliar prey, his twin hearts thrumming with anticipation. The Zalzir were not mere warriors. They were apex predators, the undisputed hunters of the galaxy. For centuries, they had tested their prowess against the deadliest creatures in existence, from the razor-backed juggernauts of Vorther to the hive-born nightmares of Nyx 7. And yet, none had ever truly challenged them. Earth was meant to be no different. The hunting party followed in formation, each armored figure moving with the predatory grace of creatures born to stalk and kill. They carried weapons far beyond Earth's comprehension, molecular shredders capable of liquefying organic matter, pulse spears that could end a life before the brain even registered pain. Their armor, woven from the compressed exoskeletons of creatures long extinct, shifted hues to mimic the environment, rendering them near invisible to the untrained eye. Virok activated his scanner, a flickering holographic display rippling to life above his forearm. He swept his gaze over the data feed. The planet teemed with life, though most of it was laughably unthreatening. Small, furry mammals scurried beneath the brush, oblivious to the silent figures now traversing their domain. The scent of warm-blooded creatures filled the air: deer, wolves, perhaps even bears. But none of those interested him. They were here for something greater. The humans. For centuries, these creatures had remained unnoticed, their planet dismissed as a primitive backwater unworthy of the great hunt. But recent intelligence reports had piqued the curiosity of the Zalzir warlords. These beings had clawed their way from beasts to sentience, waging wars upon themselves, fashioning weapons crude yet effective, surviving against all odds. It was said they had conquered their own world with sheer will and adaptability. Virok was unconvinced. His mandibles curled in amusement as he scanned the data feed. The human settlement was barely a few kilometers from their landing site, a cluster of crude structures built from stone and metal, surrounded by patches of cultivated land. It was primitive, weak. Their weapons were laughable, projectile-based firearms, as antiquated as they were inefficient. They had no energy shielding, no bioreactive armor, no cloaking technology. No, the humans were not hunters. They were prey. His orders were simple: hunt, kill, and assess. If humans proved worthy, perhaps the Zalzir would consider them sport for future generations. If not, they would remain what they had always been: insignificant. A sharp clicking sound snapped Virok's attention forward. One of his hunters, Dralgur, raised a clawed hand and motioned toward the trees ahead. Thermal imaging had picked up movement. Something fast, something alone. A human. Virok's mandibles twitched in amusement. The creature was walking through the dense foliage, unaware of the eyes watching it. It moved differently than most prey, cautious, deliberate, as if it sensed something was amiss. But that wouldn't matter. The hunt was about to end before it even began. Dralgur raised his rifle, locking onto the human's skull. A silent pulse of energy built within the chamber, the weapon primed for a kill shot. Then, without warning, the human was gone. The Zalzir froze. Virok's eyes narrowed as his visor recalibrated, searching for movement. The human had been standing in the open 1 second, and the next, it had disappeared into the underbrush without a trace. No creature moved like that. Dralgur took a step forward, weapon raised. His breath came slow and measured as he scanned the forest, his heartbeat steady. A single moment of hesitation, then a blur of motion, a glint of steel, a gurgling choke. Dralgur staggered backward, clawed fingers rising to his throat. The rifle slipped from his grasp, falling into the dirt with a muted thud. The others turned just in time to see the long, wicked blade protruding from his neck, blood, a dark, viscous shade of violet, pouring from the fatal wound. Then he collapsed. The Zalzir reacted instantly, their weapons trained on the surrounding trees. Virok felt his twin hearts hammering now, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous: intrigue. This was no panicked attack. No desperate act of survival. This was a kill, silent, efficient, and precise. And the human who had done it was already gone. Virok activated his comms. Thermal scan. Now. A flicker of data streamed across his visor, scanning for heat signatures. The forest was a blur of movement. Animals, shifting leaves, the cooling body of Draugr. But no human. Nothing. Virok exhaled slowly. This was unexpected. Humans were not meant to move like this. They were not meant to disappear. A soft clicking sound, barely audible. Not Zalzir. Something was behind them. A second hunter turned, but it was already too late. A sharp, muffled pop cracked through the air, and a figure dropped from the trees, landing with feline precision. In the same instant, a suppressed blade drove deep between the Zalzir's armored plates, severing arteries, silencing breath. Virok fired. The plasma bolt seared through empty space. The human was already moving, rolling into the underbrush, vanishing once more into the night. The remaining hunters formed a defensive circle, weapons trained on every possible angle. The forest stretched around them, vast and unknowable, shadows shifting in ways that made even Virok uneasy. He glanced down at his fallen warriors. 2 of his best, eliminated in mere seconds. No energy signatures, no traceable movement, no sound beyond the wind. His mandibles tightened. Perhaps Earth was different after all. A faint whisper cut through the silence, a voice distorted by the static of a hacked comm channel. "You thought you were the hunters." The Zalzir tensed, eyes darting in every direction. "You were wrong." The line went dead. The forest remained still. But now, the hunters could hear it, the rhythmic pounding of their own hearts, the uneasy breath between clenched teeth. For the first time in his life, Virok felt it. The sensation his prey had known for centuries. Hunted. A heavy silence settled over the forest, thick and oppressive, pressing into the space between the remaining Zalzir like a vice. Virok could feel it, the shift in the air, the shift in the hunt. This was no longer about domination, no longer a display of superiority. This was survival. And for the first time in his existence, it was his own that was in question. The human had not run. It had not fled in terror, as so many lesser species did when faced with the inevitability of their fate. No, this creature had disappeared with intent, slipping into the night like a shadow, unseen and untouched. It was not evading them. It was waiting, stalking. Draugur's body lay still and cold in the undergrowth, his empty gaze fixed on nothing, his weapon useless beside him. The wound in his throat was clean, precise. It spoke of a killer who knew anatomy, who knew exactly where to strike. There had been no hesitation, no wasted motion. The second corpse, Jalvesh, was much the same. One moment standing, the next crumpled into the dirt, his blood soaking into the earth. It had happened too quickly for any of them to react, and that, more than anything, sent an unfamiliar sensation creeping into Virok's bones. Not fear. No, the Zalzir did not fear. But this was something close. He lifted his gaze, scanning the endless expanse of blackened tree trunks and whispering leaves. Nothing moved. And yet, he could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes. The presence of something just beyond his reach, observing, calculating. The human was still here. The remaining 4 hunters adjusted their stance, their weapons shifting in nervous, jerking motions. Their breath, once steady, had grown uneven. Their bodies, once relaxed, had gone rigid. They knew. A soft rustling from behind. One of them spun, weapon raised. Too slow. A hand emerged from the darkness, wrapped in dirt and blood, fingers tightening around the Zalzir's throat before yanking him backward into the trees. There was no time to scream, no time to react. Just the sharp, visceral crunch of bone and cartilage snapping under pressure, and then the sound of something heavy collapsing into the underbrush. 3. Virok let out a low, vibrating snarl, forcing his instincts back under control. Rage burned at the edges of his thoughts, but it was dulled by something deeper. This was no ordinary battle. There was no enemy to charge at, no clear target to eliminate. This was a hunt in its purest form, and they were losing. He raised a clawed hand, signaling the two remaining hunters to close ranks. They obeyed, pressing their backs against one another, forming a triangle, eyes scanning every direction. Their breath misted in the cool night air, but nothing else stirred. The human was still out there, watching. The Zalzir were a species built for war, for blood, for conquest. Their technology made them near invincible. Their instincts had never failed them. But this creature, this man, was different. He was not attacking them head-on. He was breaking them, isolating them. And worse, he was doing it without the advantages they had always relied upon. Their sensors were useless. The human gave off no distinct thermal signature. Their scanners were blind, no residual energy traces, no heartbeat to track. This wasn't primitive warfare. This was something else entirely. The realization gnawed at Virok. The human was not running. The human was hunting. A crack of movement. This time, Virok did not hesitate. He fired his pulse rifle at the disturbance, a sizzling bolt of energy ripping through the darkness. The light illuminated the forest for a fraction of a second, long enough to see the silhouette move, a flicker of motion, low to the ground, shifting like a predator slipping between shadows. Then it was gone. A second shot rang out, not from Virok's rifle. The hunter to his left jerked violently as his helmet shattered, a fine mist of violet spraying into the air. He collapsed instantly, dead before he hit the ground. Ugh. The last remaining hunter made a choked, guttural sound, staggering backward. His weapon trembled in his grip. "It is impossible," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. Virok said nothing, because he knew. He understood now, in a way he never had before. This was possible. This was happening. And the worst part? They were completely powerless to stop it. The final hunter turned sharply, as if considering flight. A mistake. The human emerged from the shadows like a wraith, silent, fluid, merciless. A flash of silver. A gurgling choke. The Zalzir twitched once, then slumped forward, the blade buried deep between his armored plates. 1. Virok did not move. Did not react. His twin hearts pounded against his ribs, but he remained perfectly still, forcing himself to think, to plan, to survive. The human had revealed himself now, if only for a moment. His form was lean but powerful, wrapped in dark combat fatigues, his face partially obscured by black war paint. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Virok's with something more than just malice. There was no rage in that gaze. No bloodlust. Just a quiet, patient certainty. A predator who knew the hunt was already over. Virok exhaled, mandibles flaring. It was not over. Not yet. With a sudden burst of movement, he activated his cloaking field, his form flickering into nothingness. The technology was the finest in the galaxy, undetectable to sight, scent, sound. Even in open space, even against the most sophisticated tracking systems, it had never failed. Virok had hunted across 1,000 worlds. He had slaughtered apex predators, torn through war machines, led conquests that had shaped the fate of empires. And now, he would finish this. Invisible, silent, he circled his prey. The human had seen what the Zalzir were capable of, but he had not faced Virok. This was his hunt now. He moved quickly, closing the distance, claws poised to end this creature, to carve the flesh from its bones, to... A sharp pain erupted in his chest. He froze. The world tilted. His vision blurred. Slowly, his gaze dropped. A knife was buried deep between his ribs, puncturing through armor, through flesh, through the first of his two hearts. The human stood close, too close. The cloaking had not worked. The human had seen him, had anticipated him, had baited him. Virok staggered back, his mind reeling. This was not just a man. This was something else. A whisper, soft, cold, final. You should have left Earth alone. Darkness crept at the edges of Virok's vision. He was going to die here. And for the first time in his existence, he understood what it meant to be prey. The agony in Virok's chest was immense, a searing heat radiating from the wound where the human's blade had found its mark. His vision wavered, a thick, suffocating darkness creeping at the edges of his sight, threatening to pull him under. His twin hearts, one pierced and the other struggling to compensate, pounded against his ribs in a desperate attempt to keep him alive. But survival was no longer guaranteed. His cloaking field flickered erratically, the impact of the blade disrupting its integrity. He willed himself to move, to retreat, to regain some form of control, but his limbs felt heavy, sluggish. The poison. It had to be. No mere blade could bring a Zalzir warrior to his knees so quickly. No wound should have drained his strength this fast. The human had known. Had prepared. Virok tried to steady himself, mandibles tightening as he forced his gaze forward. The human stood there, just beyond the tree line, watching. Waiting, he made no move to attack, no rush to finish what he had started. He simply observed, his breath slow and measured, as if he already knew how this would end. This was not how the hunt was meant to unfold. Virok forced himself upright, wrenching the knife from his ribs. It came free with a slick sound, dark violet blood dripping onto the damp earth below. He growled, low and guttural, trying to suppress the tremor in his muscles. Pain was nothing. Death was nothing. Asterisk, he had slain creatures the size of warships, had walked unscathed through battlefields littered with the corpses of lesser beings. And yet, this single human had undone everything in a matter of minutes. The absurdity of it burned inside him like a dying star. The human shifted slightly, adjusting his grip on a sidearm, the matte black weapon held loosely in his grasp. It was unlike the crude firearms most humans wielded, sleek, modified, custom-built for precision. It lacked the crude desperation of a soldier's rifle. This was a weapon of an assassin, a specialist, a predator. "You're still standing." The human's voice was even, unreadable. There was no arrogance, no gloating, only acknowledgement. "That's impressive." Virok bared his fangs, forcing his failing body into motion. "You are not like the others." A ghost of a smile flickered across the human's lips, but it was devoid of warmth. "Neither are you." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of blood and steel between them. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. Virok had never been hunted before, had never been forced to analyze his own survival. He had spent his entire life as the apex, never questioning, never doubting, only taking, only conquering. But now, as he stood in the dirt, wounded and weakening, with nothing left but the will to fight, he understood something he had never once considered. This human was no mere soldier. No frightened creature scrambling to escape fate. This human was his equal. Perhaps even his better. And Virok had never faced an opponent who was better. A deep exhale. The human raised his weapon, the barrel leveled at Virok's skull. "You shouldn't have come here." Virok's grip tightened around the hilt of his own blade, still slick with his own blood. His mind screamed for him to attack, to do something, anything, but he hesitated, and the hesitation itself was damning. The human noticed. A flicker of understanding passed between them. Virok saw it, felt it. The moment when the hunter recognizes the dying beast before it. But there was no pity in the human's gaze. Only finality. A shot rang out. Virok moved. The bullet sliced past his skull, grazing the side of his helmet, a fraction of a second too slow to end him. His body protested, the poison surging through his veins, but he forced his failing muscles into action. He lunged, twisting at the last possible second, the blade in his grasp a blur of silver in the moonlight. The human sidestepped, fast, too fast. The knife barely missed his throat, slicing through the fabric of his sleeve instead. Virok stumbled forward, balance faltering. His vision swam. Another shot. A burst of pain ripped through his shoulder. The force spun him around, his body hitting the damp earth with a heavy thud. His breath came in ragged gasps now, his chest rising and falling in uneven intervals. The human stepped closer, his boots silent against the soft ground.
Come.
Controlled. A predator making the kill. Virok bared his fangs, refusing to submit. Even as his vision blurred, even as his body betrayed him, he would not cower. He was Zalzir. He would die as he had lived. The human stopped, standing over him now, weapon still raised but no longer trembling. There was no fear in this man. Only certainty. Slowly, deliberately, the human holstered his gun. Virok narrowed his eyes, confusion flickering through the haze of his fading consciousness. "You fought well," the human said, his voice quieter now. "Better than the others. Smarter." Virok forced a snarl. "Then finish it." The human tilted his head slightly, considering. Then, with the ease of a man who had already made his decision, he turned and began to walk away. Virok's breath hitched. He stared after him, not understanding. He had been bested. He should be dead. The human paused just before disappearing into the trees, his voice drifting back like an echo in the wind. "Now you know what it feels like." Then he was gone. Virok lay there, the weight of the words pressing against him heavier than any wound. He had never spared a lesser creature. Had never granted mercy. He had believed it was weakness. And yet, as his body bled into the soil of a world he had once thought unworthy, he realized this was not mercy. It was a warning. Earth was not a planet to be conquered. And humans were not prey. The darkness finally took him. The cold metal walls of the Zalzir warship loomed over Virok as he stepped inside, his body weakened but unbroken. Every movement sent ripples of pain through his limbs, the deep wound in his ribs barely sealed by the ship's advanced medical systems. The poison still lingered in his veins, its effects dulled but not erased. He could feel it, a reminder of his failure, of the hunt gone wrong. The others were waiting. Zalzir Command stood in a semicircle before him, their eyes sharp, their postures rigid. Warriors, strategists, leaders of conquest, each had seen battle across countless star systems. None had ever returned from a hunt defeated. None had ever been spared. Virok straightened, pushing past the pain, refusing to let weakness show. He knew what they expected. They wanted an explanation, a justification, or perhaps a denial of what had occurred. Instead, he gave them the truth. The human was not prey. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words was undeniable. "We were." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Low murmurs, shifting stances, the brief flicker of disbelief in their reptilian eyes. Virok had fought beside these warriors for decades. He had led hunts on planets teeming with creatures that could crush war machines beneath their feet. He had stood at the front lines of planetary conquests, unchallenged, unstoppable. For him to return alone, for him to speak these words, it unsettled them more than any enemy ever had. High Commander Zyravash stepped forward, his imposing form casting a long shadow across the chamber. His silver-plated armor bore the insignia of 1,000 victorious campaigns, each a testament to the Zalzir's dominance. "You are wounded," Zyravash observed, his voice low, unreadable. "Your unit is gone." Virok met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." A pause. The silence stretched, thick with expectation.
"Then."
"The human," Zyravash said, testing the word as though it were foreign to his tongue. "One of their warriors did this?" "He was no warrior." Virok's mandibles tightened. "Not as we define them. He was a hunter. A predator. And he knew the hunt better than we did." The murmurs grew louder. Some scoffed, others exchanged wary glances. They did not believe him. Zyravash remained still, his unreadable expression betraying nothing. "You wish to claim that a single human, a primitive, was responsible for the loss of an entire Zalzir hunting party?" Virok bared his fangs, his patience thinning. "I claim nothing. I speak what happened." His claws flexed, memories of the forest still vivid, the silent kills, the precision, the patience. The moment he had realized that he was not the hunter at all. Zyrovash studied him for a long moment, then turned to the gathered commanders. "There have been murmurs," he admitted, his tone carefully neutral. "Other teams. Other worlds. Isolated reports of human resistance that should not exist. A species that adapts too quickly. That learns, that fights, that does not break." He exhaled slowly. "There was a time when we believed them too fractured to unify, too consumed by their own conflicts to stand against us." Virok watched him carefully. He could sense the shift, not just in Zyrovash, but in the room itself. "They do not stand against us," Virok said, voice quiet but firm. "They hunt us. And they are learning." The words lingered, sinking into the silence like stones into deep water. Zyrovash turned to the others. "What say you?" A long pause. Then one of the warlords, a veteran of the Crimson Sieges, spoke, his tone doubtful. "The human let him live. Why? If they are truly as dangerous as you claim, why show mercy?" Virok's mandibles tightened. Mercy. That word again. But he understood now that what the human had done was not mercy. It was a warning. "They want us to know," he said, voice low. "They want us to understand what we are dealing with. They did not spare me because I was unworthy of death. They spared me so I could bring this message back." He let his gaze sweep over them. "If we return, they will not be so forgiving." Another silence. This one deeper. Then, without a word, Zyrovash turned and strode toward the massive viewport overlooking the vastness of space. Below, the distant blue of Earth hung like a silent challenge. "For a long time," he said nothing. "And we will not return." The weight of that statement settled over the room, an unspoken decree, an admission that no Zalzir had ever made before. A conquest abandoned. A species left untouched. Not out of mercy. Out of respect. Out of caution. The Zalzir had learned something today, something that would be whispered across their war councils and spoken of in hushed, uncertain voices across their fleets. Earth was not a world to be conquered. And humans were not prey. They were something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. The meeting was over. One by one, the warlords and strategists dispersed, their expressions unreadable, their thoughts unknowable. But Virok could see it in the way they moved, in the way they hesitated before speaking. They understood. The galaxy would not hear of this defeat. The Zalzir would not announce their retreat. But Earth would remain untouched. And in the void of space, where the great empires whispered of conquest and power, one truth would linger, unspoken yet undeniable. The humans had been tested. And they had won. Virok turned away from the war council, his body still aching, his pride still raw. But as he walked through the corridors of the warship, away from the silent stares of those who had doubted him, he found himself gripping the wound in his ribs, the place where the human's blade had struck. A reminder. A lesson. One he would never forget.